it was just to announce that they had been in the process of selecting individual kind of nonprofits and local community-based
Does
organizations
that answer your
going to
question?
focus. I'm sorry, what was that?
This is Barbara. I have some questions too.
You okay? So
they finish the presentation.
Sure, I'm writing the questions down as he presents. It's fine.
All right, thank you.
sorry, everyone.
That
so
sounds like
moving,
health and environment.
I think it's two meetings going on here together. I mean, we can have a party, but I don't think that was the intent.
That was weird because I just checked and they're on Zoom. So how are they cross into this meeting?
Ebenezer or Chanel have their microphone on maybe, and they watch both meetings right now.
yes. Trying to clarify who's on the line. Are Stephen, Barbara still on, or?
I don't think they were on. I think OC's right. I think whoever had their mic on at the time must have broadcasted into this meeting.
Okay. All right, gotcha. So yeah, just to continue making note. So yeah, we do have that $20 million fund that's been created and essentially is being allocated across various community-based organizations, nonprofits, and the like. This of course is a very kind of set in stone funding that cannot necessarily increase until really just the donations continue from George Soros. I quite frankly don't necessarily think that that's the very mode that we wanted to try and focus on moving forward, so as to try and provide relief. I think that it necessarily does not get to the crux of the issue here, right? Many American families are receiving really what's supercharged unemployment benefits at this moment. Something that has definitely been holding down a number of families throughout this process, given it's still been providing a lot of difficulties just because a lot of families don't necessarily have the funds coming immediately, right? There's still a delay in the number of really just the processing for checks from the Department of Labor to those individual families. And so we wanted to try and make sure that we took some time today to discuss what might the potential be here in New York State to really put forward this kind of legislation, right? So just to also make note, the reason why I wanted to put this on the agenda was because I had actually randomly met up with Carmen when I was passing by in the street. I was actually on the way to a supermarket, and she was coming on by, and so I was talking to her about what's been going on, and I was just been seeing so many things going across the news, and there's really a lot of concern now because the administration, Trump specifically, is choosing to make all these remarks in the news that are targeted towards a lot of the undocumented and trying to really raise fear about really them being here. Uh, so it's something that I think worries a lot of our families, our neighbors, our individual friends. Uh, there has been a discussion on a much broader level in other areas of the country. I think that it's strange because we're New York State, right? We have actually 1 in 10 undocumented in a lot of these very big policy tanks and institutions that have been looking at undocumented immigrants across the entire country and where they can really see data arising. They've been trying to focus in on what are the areas that really need the most relief for these immigrant populations. Um, a few of the resources that I had sent out were from some pretty big, policy institutions that have been leading in a lot of ways on major issues for just decades now. Um, so I sent over one in specific that comes to mind. It's from the Taxation and Economic Policy Institute. They have been focused for decades on trying to ensure that we can provide an adequate tax revenue from communities that also really alleviates the concerns on more marginalized individuals. They were specifically looking for years to find ways to really make the case to a lot of the legislators on the federal level about actually putting forward a legislation allowing for undocumented workers to start getting papers, really a form of identification so that then they can process whatever claims that they have at the end of the year and contribute to our economy. It's actually been shown that if you actually were to offer to offer this kind of authorization, you would actually have an increase of up to 8.6% in state and local taxes just by allowing them to be, taxed, to actually claim their taxes, and also, be provided a lot of protections, that many other workers here in the United States get. So, it's incredibly powerful. It's important. It really just makes sense from us as an entire country, not to mention a state, not to mention a locality, to have these kind of changes that are made. So, one of the other parts that was really interesting in my research was that we just don't focus enough on really how much is allocated to the state on an individual basis by immigrant communities. One of the things that we have to look at really to try and determine how much undocumented immigrants and really just individuals that aren't able to use a social security number are doing is using ITINs, right? These are essentially tax identification numbers that are used by a number of undocumented individuals or just recent Americans that were just processed, right? So as to try and make sure that they can also pay their share of the taxes. There's data that has been showing that even years back, we're talking about in 2017, 2015, the data had been showing for New York State, undocumented immigrants, or even those that were using ITINs, I'll say, they were contributing $1.1 billion. They had been paying those taxes. But unfortunately, because of the standards that we have right now across our state, our federal government, they weren't necessarily as, they weren't given the opportunities to receive the safety net benefits that many others do, right? And so I think that, today we have a discussion that's coming up with our assembly member to try and really start giving those benefits that they have earned, they receive, that they should receive. And this is one of the reasons why I was just very moved when I heard that she was really working on this kind of opportunity for a lot of our immigrant neighbors and family members.
So I knew a little bit about the ITIN aspect of how undocumented do file for taxes. I don't know enough about it. One question that I have that maybe if you have the answer to that you can give is how are they shielded in the event that they can be targeted by engaging in that way? Because I'm sure that that's a big issue for a lot of people. Can they be targeted by ICE? Can they be targeted for deportation, etc.? I think everybody has human rights, and of course, especially if they're paying into a system, they deserve to have some type of access and benefit from that the way that anyone else has. But on the side of where we are today, where this virus is concerned, how it is impacting our community, how it's impacting people who are locked out of the system, like undocumented, I want to bring up in that context, which I spoke a little bit with Ariel about, the fact that this committee put forth a resolution which was passed by the board, which was related to refugees, undocumented individuals, detainees that may have been released into the community, and the fact that they're left in the lurch even before this crisis. That was a major issue. And I want this committee to be aware that part of what has happened in this entire transition, we are now in May. This session started in September. And that resolution, I've asked the office for multiple times for the final resolution, and have never, I can show you emails where it's just been completely ignored. So some of the work could have actually been done. And actually that's something that I was working on. I ran all the way down to the village to meet with the coalition that was working on that. I had 2 other meetings. We talked about it in committee. People showed up in committee for us to pass that resolution. The board passed it, and nothing has been done by this board. The intent which came out of this committee collectively, was to create a coalition of the organizations in our community that all stand in the gap for that exact population. So while it doesn't cover the tax aspect of it, what could be being addressed and what we could have been ready for in this moment was having that coalition all united, having a front to step up for exactly that population. And that was not done because of all the same dynamics that I keep screaming about in this board. What's happening is the work is being held back, not people. The work for this community is being held back. So I want to put that on the table, yet another item. So, and while I'm talking quickly, I'm not sure why, but health and environment are broadcasting actively right now, and I'm guessing it's because they're in Zoom. I don't know if WebEx has that functionality, but this committee is not broadcasting right now to the community. Additionally, the broadcast for health and environment is happening on a page that has 70 people on it, when a lot of work has been done by OC, which most people are well aware, but on a page that I originally created for the board that has about 2,000 people on it, and that has a reach of maybe like 40,000. I have seen certain posts that our board has done where it's reached 40,000 people. And now instead we're talking to 70 people because there's people that are pretty much children in the background making decisions for this board that make no sense because they can't communicate and act professionally. So they created a brand new Facebook page, which is broadcasting to no one right now. So I want to put that on the table as well. I'm done.
Can we consider or entertain the possibility of just having our board page with 40,000 people just share whatever other page was created to broadcast events?
You know what? I will do that right now. Thank you, Naisha. But something needs to be done about what is happening in the background with this board. And it needs to not just be me screaming all the time. If anyone else has an interest in things working efficiently and appropriately and respectfully and professionally, I would really like for other people to start speaking up about these things as well.
Yeah, and just to make note here, I do want to try and actually find that resolution because it was a while ago. I have to, yeah, I'll have to try and ask the board staff for that resolution. But I do remember we were discussing at that time, really trying to make sure that within the city council they were trying to pass a certain budget that would focus on just even the potential of any issues arising with immigrants because of the federal response. So, you know, I do want to try and make sure that we get that actually back because that was a while ago. And I do think that, you know, had we, you know, been able to also advocate at that time, specifically that language, you know, it would have been potentially beneficial specifically in these times, right? So yeah, I'll definitely say, you know, just on my end, I'll be reaching out to ask about that resolution. And I'll also try and check, I think some of the old folders we might, I mean, I might still have it in there, but I'll try and check to see if we have that one.
So can you clarify something for me? I'm sorry, I was not in the committee when that resolution passed, and if it passed already, then do you want to bring it back for a revision to add on?
No, it actually addressed a separate issue. What it was addressing was that the federal government at the time was actively just dropping detainees, asylum seekers into sanctuary cities, specifically because, you know, of this president that we have. So people were being dropped with not even $1 or a phone number in their pocket, which basically put our communities at harm, but also put them in harm's way without resources. So this was an attempt to galvanize institutions that are already working in that regard in our community, bringing them to the forefront together to build a constructive plan on addressing what we expected to happen, which was that they could be dropped in our community specifically, but also to put forth, you know, ideas for government to have things in place for that population as well. So But so it's different than what Ariel is talking about, but it should be included in this context. But the statement that I have made about all these things, I would like that to for sure be a part of the record and in the minutes, because I do intend to continue to address how this is being handled.
Yeah, and this could very well serve as like an opportunity for us to also try and revise that original resolution that we passed in committee, and then try and also just add in the additional be it resolved that we would like to try and have some future funding being allocated in the event that it's some sort of pandemic, to say the very least, but some sort of event arises in which it causes undue hardship on specifically undocumented immigrants or immigrants in general across the city of New York. I don't want to try and hop off the conversation because I just want to try and wait till Carmen gets here. Hopefully I see Orlando on.
Just there, yeah.
Orlando, are you able to speak right now?
Hey Ariel, how are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you? She hasn't gone on yet?
I don't believe so. I just wanted to try and
text her right now. I'm driving right now, but let me just let her know because I thought she was gonna get on like around 7:30 or so. Let me just double check because she wasn't on another call earlier, but she should be getting on pretty soon. Let me just double check.
All right, no worries. No worries.
You guys might continue.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to hear from you as well. Always a pleasure having you. So what I guess I'll also just want to try and do now, I just want to read through some of the specific information that I found that I thought would be helpful in crafting tonight's resolution. So there's a few different pieces that have come up. I think we found
real quick, Ariel. My bad for cutting you off. Real quick. I just want to synopsis. What is it? What is it exactly that we're trying to ask for in the resolution? And what do you like? What are the asks? I guess, and yeah, what are the asks? Sorry, and as the questions pop up, I'll continue to ask.
First off, I just want to point out you have an amazing haircut. Second of all, so what we were discussing before was that we're looking to try and have a discussion and potentially then pass a resolution that focuses on providing in New York State an immigrant relief fund. Carmen has been working on a piece of legislation that she's going to talk to us a little bit more about soon. That's really just focused on doing that here in New York State. And I think it's kind of also trying to make sure that we're also keeping up with the discussion because in California as well as some other localities across the country, they've already begun to do this.
Got it.
So I was trying to just like bring up some other like facts and statistics that I found recently in some of the reading. And so I was just going to mention that because some of these facts might also be something that we might want to include in the resolution to really kind of make clear what's the need and why do we perceive ourselves being in need of creating that on the New York State level.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I read through some of the stuff, the material you sent through, and I kind of like one of the stats that like kind of like appealed to me was as you mentioned earlier was about the taxation stuff and like basically like that there's about 11 that immigrants pay about 11 point something, I think 7.2%, not 11.2 billion dollars, excuse me, worth of like taxes, like 7x%, 7x billion comes from like sales tax. 1.1 I think comes from like income tax, so on and so forth. I'm not looking at the stats. I'm just trying to go from like recollection. But like what I found interesting is just that, right? Like that, the fact that there's being tax revenues being pushed through to our system, but there's no real, I guess, like gain back to that community. Now, my question is, I mean, maybe I guess we'll or when Carmen jumps on, like she'll, I guess, like go through the weeds of it. Like, where would the funding come from? Like, what would it be from, like the quote unquote citizen taxpayer, quote unquote, you know? Would that revenue come from that, like, so this for the immigration relief fund, or like, or would it come from, like, you know, grassroots fundraising? Would it come, you know, like all that type of stuff? Because for it to be like somewhat sustainable long term, because like you mentioned that I forgot his name, but the gentleman that's Democrat that provided like 100 and something million dollars to help this cause. But I could only imagine that could only happen for so long, you know. So you know, like, I guess that's where my mind is going, like, in terms of like, okay, like this would be wonderful and great to like put on the map, but like, what would be the, I guess, long-term strategy or solution for long-term sustainability? Because it could happen for, like, you know, these next, like, let's say 2 to 5 years, but then it's like, all right, how can we create something that it could be everlasting? But that's where my mind is at for now. Yeah.
So I'll actually just mention. So Orlando just messaged Carmen. I think she's on the line.
I'm here. Yes, I just got on. How are you?
Just calling.
How are you doing? It's great to have you.
Good. Sorry I'm late. I was on another call.
I saw you were doing pretty impressive work talking to Make the Road.
Yeah, we were talking to Make the Road about the work that we've done on the New York State Dream Act and, you know, some other issues that they've been having with the application and how to like streamline that process so more people can, you know, have access to that benefit.
Well, I just want to say, you know, thank you again for joining us. You know, the entire committee, I think they're just excited to hear from you. I know that, you know, we briefly met a few weeks ago now at the grocery store talking about the work you're doing, and I think it's just incredible. You know, we've been hearing so much across the news, what's happening in California, what's happening in several localities across our country, and I think it's just impressive to see that there's a potential to really have that in New York State now.
Yes. So we're excited. This is a new piece of legislation that Senator Jessica Ramos and I have introduced, and we're just beginning to talk about it. And so I'll walk you through sort of what the idea is, and I'm happy to take some questions. So basically, we're calling it the Excluded Worker Bailout Fund. And basically what it does is that it establishes a market tax on billionaires for unrealized capital gains. So those are assets that they have that they do not pay personal income tax towards. So, you know, I know that many of you might have already heard of like crisis points throughout our communities on any given day for vulnerable people. So we need to take a look at, you know, how we're defining essential workers, when a state of emergency is called, all of these levers that give the executive, the governor, added powers, and how we can use pressure points to kind of influence what comes out of those crises. Because if you ask me, our communities are in crisis every single day. Obviously, this crisis is a health crisis, a public health crisis. But, you know, environmental pollution, housing, inhumane housing conditions. We talk about, you know, with COVID-19 and the need to quarantine, how, you know, we don't have the appropriate housing in order to do that in a healthy and safe way. I can't even begin to tell you how many people have been calling my office and calling me personally to say, I was renting a room and because of COVID, I'm being asked to leave by a roommate who's now nervous about getting COVID, or people who have been couch surfing, who are technically not considered homeless, right? Because our definition of homelessness in the state is like if you're living on the street, like street homelessness, but we have people that are doubled up, tripled up, and plus that are technically homeless because they really have nowhere else to go other than that family member's couch. And so I've also been working on legislation with the Coalition for the Homeless around the way that the state defines homelessness and the services that are triggered based on that definition. I was working on it very diligently before everything went down with COVID, so I'm hoping that now that we're not in session, I can take that back up when things slow down again. I'm hoping to have that introduced hopefully in the next session at this point. And I would love to also bring that before the committee or the housing committee, whichever committee is more appropriate to discuss, because I think it's something that specifically impacts our community.
Definitely. And I've been sending a few links to the folks on the committee so far this week. I think it's just very important to note really what's been happening now in the middle of this economic downturn. Even Forbes had been reporting this week that really the wealth of just the richest individuals across our country increased by 308 billion just within 1 month. And it often just goes to show you that it's really the marginalized that then are losing at that point. So during this economic crisis, I want to, support this sort of legislation that really is trying to pick up just, even a fraction of those resources that are now going towards more affluent individuals and hopefully getting those resources over to those that need them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the things you'd see in the budget, and maybe when we have some more time, we can delve more deeply into that. But, there's tax breaks on things like buying super yachts. So if you buy a super yacht in New York State, you get a tax break, right? Like, who the heck is going around buying super yachts? And if these people have money to buy super yachts, why do they need a tax break, right? So we could be using that money towards a community or a cause that actually needs funding. And so there is plenty of things in budgeting that I've unfortunately had to learn in this process, that I know that if we really took a look at where the needs are in our state with a more human approach and less of a profit approach, then we would be able to actually make some dents in the needs that exist in our community.
Does anyone else on the committee happen to have any questions? If not, I'd be more happy to open it up to the community.
Yeah, I have a question actually. So hey Carmen, it's Waldis. I wanted to thank you first and foremost for everything you've done for our community and for the mission that you have and the vision. But for this potential bill, I guess, that the excluded workout bailout fund, I wanted to know, like, more or less, like, what is your angle in terms of like allocation? So, for example, like, let's say if we were to pass this, like, or if like the bill does pass and there's somehow some way we're able to tax the ultra wealthy to create some type of immigrant relief fund. How would you go about like implementing the structure for this? Like, how would immigrants get access to this? Yeah. So I just wanted to know that, and like I know that Ariel sent the article about like kind of like something that happened in California where they it was I think $100-something million. That was like a disaster relief fund, and they like kind of implemented it through CBO. So, but I just wanted to kind of pick your brain on as to like what your thoughts were, like, and how we go about like dispersing and allocating all of the funding.
So, I mean, there's different ways to do that. Definitely, I believe that our nonprofits are good, basically on the ground ways to get some of this funding allocated. But also, I think that the way that we set this up is through the negotiation process of legislation, basically we have to assign oversight of who would oversee this. I mean, I know that you've heard probably in the news the mess that has been the Department of Labor system in this time of pandemic, right? So it could go through a state agency. You could create a division within one of the agencies that already exists. You could do a mixture of things where you create a fund that goes specifically for different things like food access or medical, or, you know, depending how you want to sort of flesh this out. I think that what we envision right now is a combination of having nonprofits help with the disbursement of funds, but also having some level of agency help in order to have oversight as to who applies and who does who is able to draw down the funds. And there are various offices that exist that could do this type of work. Obviously, the Department of Labor is one of them, although I'm not sure if that would be the best one, depending on the capacity that they have. But we also have, for example, the Office of New Americans. The Department of State has several departments there. So there's different mechanisms of getting this funding drawn down into our communities. That's kind of phase two of the conversation. Once legislation is introduced, we begin then to have that conversation for sure.
Earlier in the meeting, we talked about, or actually I brought up the question about privacy where undocumented are concerned, and how, yes, they deserve the same access to the tax revenue that they pay into if there's a benefit that's being issued to other taxpayers. But how do we shield them from being targeted? And just some of the conversation that you just stated about, you know, ways that we can implement it within agencies brings up something that I've been working towards, which is creating a blockchain solution that maybe within that their identity could be shielded, where they could have access to funds, where they could be given their own basically like account, where they wouldn't be able to readily be identified by the federal government or ICE, so that it could expose them to harm. I just feel like their technology seems to be like the last part of the conversation, when maybe sometimes it should be the first part of the conversation, because it could help us to map out the best practices for, you know, these solutions that we're trying to create.
Yes, I agree 100% that technology should be a part of it. I will also add that, you know, there's precedent in legislation that conceals the identity of people who are undocumented. I mentioned earlier, you know, I was the main sponsor of the New York State DREAM Act, and that is being done through the Higher Education Services Corporation, which is a state agency. And basically, you insert language where the federal government cannot access, you know, that state database. And so there is some precedent with other legislation. I know that we had multiple discussions around driver's licenses for all. And there were some hiccups there too, with ensuring that people's, you know, identity is protected and that they aren't put at risk. I think that we can draw on some of the lessons we've learned with the passage of those two pieces of legislation and others. But I definitely do agree with you that technology is something that we need to explore further. There is actually one of my colleagues from Queens there's like a little subcommittee on cryptocurrency and all of the technological revolutions with banking. And he is from Queens. His name is Clyde Vanell. So definitely someone that I would engage in this conversation to see what mechanisms are out there. But I agree with you.
I would love to learn more about that. I'm very involved in that and have advocated at the SEC even. New York is not, shamefully for me, because I feel like New York is usually pioneer where many things are concerned, but they happen to be one of the most oppressive states where that's concerned. And, we're very underbanked. And, I feel like that's an area that we could definitely be lifting up people more, but that's a conversation that we could have for another time. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone from the public that had a question? If not, I think we've come to, I guess, an end here.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I will make sure that I send you, Marielle, some media coverage that there's been on the legislation so you can share with the group. And once the bill is actually printed, I'll make sure that, that you get it so that you can share as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I just want to say that I hope everyone is safe. And if you need anything or anyone in your community needs anything, my office is operating on a remote office basis, but our phones are manned every single day, and we also have access to email. Let me just tell you, our Google number is 716-249-6607, and I'll also text that to Ariel so he can share. We are available 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and via email almost like every single day around the clock. So please let us know how we can be helpful.
Thank you, Carmen. Really do appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you.
So everyone,
Thanks.
seems like we've got our work cut out. I just wanted to actually note, so some of the things that that were kind of being brought up in the articles that I shared, I did try and collect a few of those individual like fact statistics, just so that we had them if we wanted to try and start getting a resolution. We could, in the resolves, curtail it so that it specifically reads out the excluded worker bailout fund. And then, if perhaps within, XYZ number of days, we do find that there's a specific bill number that comes, and we can have it essentially amended so as to include that specific bill number, if that works.
Let me ask you this question. Is it too early to discuss resolution? I'm just curious. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm for it. I'm just asking like more or less like the timeline and feasibility. Like, would it be too early?
Yeah, I kind of had that question when I think Waldy's asked a question earlier, and Carmen was saying, or it may have been you, Ariel. She was saying they don't have a name for the bill yet, like it's still in the works. So might we see new clauses in this bill that we might want to weigh in on, and so maybe we might be premature and vote for it today? Or like, do we know a time? Is Ovali on Orlando? Do you know a timeline for this for this bill? Is it going to be voted? I mean, they're not even in session yet, right?
They are to resume session next week. They're discussing having remote session at the moment. But when the bill's drafted, I don't have a reference number for it already. It's kind of hard to. Oh, that I think the Assemblywoman is there.
Yeah, sorry, I got disconnected.
Okay.
The question was about the bill number. I mean, I would say, the bill is in. We should probably have a bill number. I would say latest end of next week. So if you guys want to hold off and just wait until we get your bill number and a copy of the bill so that you don't have to draft or edit the resolution, I think that should be fine if you're okay with that.
So we don't expect a vote until maybe June, right?
A vote, we're not sure. First, we have to call people. We have to be called back to session, and that is something that right now we are confronting and trying our best to push for us to be called back to session. We could be called back to session and have something done now, or they can call a special session over the summer once this is done, or edit the session calendar and have us start earlier in the season, like October. Right now, it's very unclear when we're coming back, if we're coming back, and what that looks like. So my best case scenario we get it done before July, before session is over. Worst case scenario, we're looking at the fall.
Just to piggyback off of that, is there a version of the bill, like a draft version, that you're sharing with advocates and that advocates are providing feedback on that you could share with us? Or is there no interchanging happening between advocates and your office?
Yes, we do have some drafts that we've been sharing with them and also in the conversations that we've had. So I'm happy to send around some notes. Make the Road New York actually put out a list of demands for immigrant communities that include this bill. And they have like a summary of the bill and what it does and other things that they're asking for as well. So I'm happy to share that as well.
Perfect. Can you also just send over the website for Make the Road and wherever that is being broadcasted, please, and thank you.
Yes, yes, of course.
I mean, I can definitely, of course, look, and just try and find some of that information as well. If you would all like to try and wait a little longer, I mean, we can definitely do that. The reason I think why we're trying to just get things sort of moving is just because, I mean, from my end, I just want to try and get resolutions out as soon as we can, given that we're going to be now unfortunately out of session at the end of June. That's kind of also the other reason I was mentioning before, that for the Ranked Guidelines Board meeting, we're also trying to get the resolution out as well. So I'm happy to try and then maybe move this to June, if that's if you'd all like to try and like wait a bit more.
I think that we should wait to move to June and also talk with advocates in our own community. I think that it's great that Carmen's office is working with immigration advocates and Make the Road, but I think that it's important for us to center our resolutions and the work that we're doing to the communities that we're in and that we're advocating for. And I think it'd be a great opportunity to just like try at least to make contact with advocates in Washington Heights and Inwood.
So I second what Aisha said, and I also think that pulling back the original resolution that we passed and beginning the work of pulling those stakeholders to the table so that they can weigh in on this specific item would be a good plan of action.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So thank you again, Carmen and Orlando. I really do appreciate it. We'll I guess.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll try and bring then hopefully if we have some more context, and of course the press releases that we're all going to be looking at, we'll be able to discuss a little bit more in detail then, and try and review a little bit more. So with that, I guess then we can try and transition on over to discussions on specifically the expansion of homeless services. So to preface this conversation, I'm not sure how much folks have been seeing in the news. There's just a lot of development now, especially within a lot of the subways. There's been a lot of coverage on what's happening. Essentially, to kind of just give the main points, there was a mention of really the MTA stepping up and working alongside some of our NYPD officers to try and start getting a lot of the homeless who are staying inside the individual cars, outside of the stations, into shelters. There's been a lot of work going on. There are some results that have been showing that they've been able to try and get some individuals on over to the shelters, which is looking like a good number right now. But I think that a lot of advocates have also been mentioning that there's concern that's arisen from, okay, well, if you've had these individuals then taken out from those places, what's to say they will not return, right? And some of those concerns are still there in regards to, what might happen once entering shelter. Last month, we were mentioning that, there's been concerns about what happens when you enter into a lot of the shelters that are specifically set up in a sort of dorm-like setting. Kind of an open room where you have multiple beds alongside one another. There's been, I think, some press coverage that's been kind to try and show that there's been some efforts to remove certain proportions of the populations in shelters. They've been focusing now on trying to make sure that they reduced in certain sites the populations down to 50 within the individual shelters, and then having some of those moved on over to other hotels. In the articles that I sent this week, there was specific mention of some of them in particular that were doing this. I think that it's one way in which they're going to be able to work now to try and reassure some of those individuals once they go into the shelters that they're getting a bit more space from one another, right? So as to try and ensure that they're keeping up with the social distancing standards. How much that's been playing inside now with the individuals that are staying in or potentially moving in from the subways, I think that's also important. And we're going to have to look at what's going to be some of the findings, right? There's just still a lot going on, and I don't know if anyone else had heard or maybe thought of anything else that came up recently that maybe they saw or heard. But I just wanted to hear what everyone else might have thought about some of these concerns.
So, I mean, I think last month we talked about the 100,000 apartments, and just imagine if all the homeless people would have a place to be, which is not a shelter. Be a studio apartment, does not have to be 5-bedroom apartments, and that will be fundamentally different story, because you would probably avoid some of the potential virus contamination, and it's just a fundamentally different system. The fact that, I mean, like, where are they going now? They put homeless people in hotels. I mean, that's the reality right now. So once this virus is over, whenever that's going to be, a year or whatever, then we are going back to square one. So there is no approach that really deal with the homeless issues from the basis, from the root of the problem. A shelter is not a home. The shelter system, as far as I'm concerned, is not a good system. We have to just get it out of the way and push for the same initiative like the 100,000 apartments, put homeless in homes, in apartments. And so I think we should, like I mentioned to you over the phone, we should have a resolution about something like that. I'm not calling for a resolution today because it's a lot of work to be done about that. And because there were a lot of studies about that program and how successful it is. And so I can't see any other way to deal with homelessness. A shelter, especially the shelter that is available in New York City, it's not a home. I mean, what are we do? We're not solving the basic problem. We're not.
And so just to ask, do you think that right now the conversation, especially during this pandemic, has just been very limited, and it's not necessarily, yielding a lot of the kind of fruits that we would like to really see? Because I mean, it is that, that kind of, I think, environment just amongst advocates too, right? Some are very, and rightly so, focused on the preventative measure at this moment, just to try and make sure that people are getting spaced out. Because at the end of the day, if those individuals are not the ones that are going to, go into those subways, but also are not being allowed to stay in those subways, where do we really leave them? And
So
I think
it's really like there is no conversation about how do we solve that problem. The coronavirus is just another layer of issue, okay? And there, I don't feel that there is appetite to really solve that in a right way. And we're not even talking about the money. Like, how much does it cost to have homeless shelter system as opposed to have apartments? And so this is not this is that's absolutely fundamentally need to change.
Sorry, just then. Oh,
Sorry, I think that OC, sorry, is echoing a lot of the sentiments that we've like consistently shared on this committee, especially with regards to shelters and the fact that they aren't a proper home for anyone. But I think as someone that comes from advocating for individuals that are, I guess like navigating the shelter system and the benefit system, I think that it's a good temporary. It's not good, but it's bare minimum for temporary individuals that are temporarily trying to transition from place to place. I'm not saying it's adequate at all, but I also want to note that I don't necessarily think the shelters themselves are the issues. I think it's the lack of support and mental health resources for a lot of individuals that don't feel safe, for single adult individuals that don't feel safe in shelters. So if we are going to address the issue in regards to providing more permanent housing for individuals that are in shelters, I think that we should also combat the issue by ensuring that we incorporate services and a support system that will help them from re-entering the same cycle that they're currently in.
Right. This is the system that exists. Again, I'm keep saying that, and I have to go back to it. Ohio or Illinois, they do incorporate it to social support, and so they don't just give homeless, here's an apartment, and wave them goodbye. There is a connection. They have to show up for a particular meeting, whatever, each one of them in with their own issues that need to be resolved. And so they don't just throw them in apartment and leave. And that's really important, because some of them do go back on the street because that's what they used to, that's what they know, and it's hard to change, or whatever the reason is. But some of them are staying in those apartments, and this is just you know I understand that right now this is what we have, and we have a shelter system, but we have to move away from this. We really have, because it's not a solution to anyone. It's temporary. It's a temporary remedy to, and doesn't lead anywhere. There is no continuation to, okay, from here you're moving to a permanent solution. It's not there. That's the end of the line. A shelter is the end of the line. It doesn't go anywhere. You know what I mean?
mm,
So, quickly before I start, I just want to say, and I know this has nothing to do with our topic area, but Gregory and Travis McMichael, who murdered Ahmaud Arbery, have just been arrested. I want to put that out there because that's been infuriating me over the last week. That being said, homelessness and the varying populations that are impacted by it are something that are near and dear to my heart. I'm actively advocating for 3 different individuals that are in different types of situations. One who is recently released from being incarcerated, who is homeless. Another who is homeless in a standard shelter for women, and another who is a domestic violence victim who is homeless with her children. And so there is no one size fits all for what's happening in this arena. There's different layers and different ways that people are impacted. I have to say, much like what Naisha was saying, there are some shining examples of good opportunities and experiences, as well as resources that are within the system. The person who is dealing with domestic violence was having a horrible time. I got the controller's office to step in to advocate for things that were happening. Unfortunately, she had an apartment that was waiting for her that she lost because of some of the problems that were within the system. Some of you may have been on an email that I put out in that regard. But she ended up now being in a shelter for domestic violence victims, where at first she was housed with a roommate who was an absolute mess, who was just like letting the garbage overflow. She bought her own garbage so she wouldn't have to be responsible for this person's garbage. The person let their garbage overflow and then was using hers. And then with COVID, it just became a health concern about that person's activity. And then she has a small infant child. And in that situation, the reason why I bring it up is she alerted the staff there that, listen, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm concerned about my health because of this. And they told her roommate how she felt. And her roommate came to the room to fight her, domestic violence victims. So that is a poor example of what someone could be experiencing in this crisis. But what ended up happening is she ended up getting her own space, which is pretty much like an apartment, which is beautiful. And they bring her, you know, like 3 meals a day and snacks and other resources, diapers for the baby, all that kind of stuff, which is, you know, what she needs to subsist right now. However, it does raise the question for me, well, why couldn't that just be an apartment, right? So you have her there in an individual apartment by herself. That is fantastic, but she's still going to be transitioned out, right?
So she's not going to be able to stay there.
She's not going to be able to stay there.
That's a serious issue.
So, and then with the person who was recently incarcerated, was released from being incarcerated, they're being shifted through a number of places. It's like from the halfway house to another place and then to another place, all which they're being housed with multiple other people, and some people who have extreme behaviors, who don't even believe that this crisis is. And then lastly, this other woman, she's been in the system for about 5 years now. She lost her children because of being in the shelter system, and doesn't even have contact with her children because now they're in foster care. She can't communicate with them. And so we need to be doing something different, but I think we also need to be in touch with the data about how those varying layers of populations are impacted in these situations so that we can speak to exactly, and maybe we have a resolution that happens first, but long term, I would like to have a better understanding of how all these people are being impacted.
Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I promise this is the last thing I'm gonna say. So I think that something that came to mind when Aisha was talking about it was the fact that the individual that she was referencing was able to advocate for herself and get herself out of the situation. But the reality is that not everyone has that ability, and not everyone has the language access and is able-bodied and can do these things, right? And I think that we should also, in addition to like support services and permanent housing, talk about some sort of navigation program for individuals in the shelter system, because at the end of the day, like, their livelihood is on the line, and it does impact health, and it does impact many things. And we should maybe start considering having someone, or like creating this system or program where like there are patient individual navigators. I don't know what you call them, housing navigators, because these, like, as someone that worked and interacted closely with the shelter system, shelter managers and directors don't do anything. For them, it's like a job. It's an everyday job. They're not committed to like the well-being of the residents. And I think to have someone that's with a background in social work or a background with social, like, just like dealing with people would be beneficial to these individuals and help bridge a lot of the barriers that we are identifying when we talk about the shelter system.
Yeah, and in that vein, I think this is another area where technology should be implemented, because something that I've witnessed happening is where shelter managers are responsible to help the person transition into housing. And I've had people tell me that they knew for a fact that that person was instead helping their personal friends get into those apartments instead of the people that they're supposed to be supporting, which should not be happening. There should be a system where we know this batch of housing is meant for the shelter system to be helping people transition, and that we know that that's where it's being funneled into, right? Where people couldn't undermine that process and basically, help themselves. And so I agree with Lisa. And there are many situations where I've heard where the person is doing more of the advocacy for themselves because they're not being helped. I mean, there are some examples of people that do a great job, but there's examples of people not doing much of anything at all. So, which is a waste of resources, waste of taxpayer money, and then OC did bring up sometimes the cost of these individual beds. What the developer, something that I need to not forget. In the conversation about the shelter that has now been put on Audubon, I forget what is it, like 178, 179. The conversation came up about the fact that the way that it is working is a developer buys a building and the developer builds it or builds a development to spec to be a shelter, right? With the expectation that they intend on getting a contract for the city. And then the city locks themselves into that no matter before the community is even a part of that conversation. And so pretty much it's predetermined the cost that the developer wants to recoup, what location it's going to be in, and the specs of what that building is. And that seems to me to be backwards. It should be happening in reverse. It should be government placing a demand on what the needs are that need to be filled, and then maybe taking bids from a developer that want to fill that hole the way that government sees it proper. So that's my last spiel.
So something I want to chime in on, and so sorry, is that like homelessness is such a like everybody has kind of touched on. It's such a layered issue that it's hard to really like pinpoint what the natural cause to like identify what the specific and like to get to the cause for homelessness. It would be it's so subjective and so on a case by case basis that it's so hard to really like come up with like the end all be all solution for, and therefore like it's so again like it's so hard to like really kind of wrap our heads around it. But what I do see and what I am seeing is that there is a huge increase in homelessness. Like visually, you step outside and I see a lot more substance use. Folks that gather around doing a lot more active substance use, a lot more breaking into cars. That's something that I'm hearing now more than ever. That's a whole nother conversation. It's a public safety issue. I actually have like 3 friends that either cars got stolen, car got broken into, the whole nine, and this all happened within the last like couple of weeks. That's a whole other conversation. And that's again, I'm gonna silo with that differently. But the to link it back to homelessness, what I'm seeing is a lot of folks are like in banks. A lot of folks are accessing public spaces to try to find spaces to live or just spaces to like just stay for the night. And what I think the solution, not the solution, but like something that can be helpful, it goes back to like that housing first model. I think we've spoken about in the past in this committee before, but also like seeing like there's this like a really compelling TED talk that kind of addresses the fact that if you all the money that we're spending in shelters, if you just actually house the people, like there'll be no or at least a lot less homelessness, right? But the fact is, what I do find is that I think the city is, and I'm gonna be honest and frank and maybe too blunt to say this, is that I think the city is overpopulated, and the reason why I say this is because I'm seeing now more than ever even from a social work perspective, right? Like apartments are being overpopulated, right? Like there's families living in rooms, and like then like I've seen myself where there's like 3 families living in a 3-bedroom apartment. And obviously that this is being highlighted now in a COVID lens, given that proximity and the social distancing and how hard it is to do that when an apartment is over capacity, quote unquote, but let alone the city at large, right? And so what I'm thinking, and just like as everybody's touching on their points, is that I think the city has invested too much into the shelter system to be a solution, right? Versus like actual providing like, subsidies or just really creating housing that just provides that just gives people housing, right? And therefore it would just like kind of like uh, eliminate the issue, quote unquote. But what I do see too is like in these supportive housing issues. So like it's so layered again. Like the issues are so layered. Like in these subsidized housing, for example, like there's things like SROs. I'm sure folks may know and have heard of, or like places with supportive housing where there's case managers there, so on and so forth. There's issues in those systems as well, right? Where they're CBOs are like mismanaging their funding and so on and so forth. And what I do see, and again, maybe I was too young to really like acknowledge it, was when I don't know, forgot who made the decision to eliminate Section 8, right? But I do want to say that I think this, again, like maybe I can't really pinpoint like the before and after, but like I do want to say that I feel like there's been a spike in more, I guess, like issue like rent issues, eviction issues, or homelessness issues, and homelessness of people at risk for being homeless ever since, and like I think it's like post Section 8 got like eliminated. And now I'm not saying that we need to have Section 8 or subsidized housing for it to be like fixed, but I do think that that would maybe it would be helpful. Again, like just giving, instead of building shelters, just providing people the apartment, like just instead of creating a room for somebody to live in, just make it an apartment, right? Or make it just something somebody could just live in versus like just allowing it to be just a temporary space. Now I do find value in shelters, right? There are benefits to having shelters in our communities. I just think that the city has invested so much into shelters that it's just created the homelessness issue just even more, right? And yeah, I just think that I don't know how to tackle the issue, but it is a conversation that should be had. I think from outside of our COVID right now, I think homelessness is the biggest issue our city has, right? And this all reminds me too. Like, and we also have to be mindful. There's folks that don't want housing, which is fine too, right? Would rather stay homeless, and because there's a culture within that as well. And I do understand that, and I must respect self determination and like folks making those decisions on their own. But I do think that there's a lot more people that are in these situations and are at risk of being homeless. I don't want to be homeless. That there are folks that would rather not. Yeah, and it reminds me of like Washington D.C. I went to D.C. once a couple of years back for a conference, and I asked a homeless person, because typically I humanize everybody, right? I humanize like I see people as we are one, right? And so I spoke to a homeless person. I gave him like a dollar or two. When I can, I will. And so when I had a conversation with him, I asked him, hey, just curious, like what's the homelessness in DC is kind of crazy because it's there. Like you see people laid out on the street, like just there, laid out on top of stuff. And I was like, I'm just curious, like what are the services like in Washington D.C. for homelessness? And then he told me, people here, there are a lot of services here. If anybody's homeless, it's because they want to be. So I said, okay, I hear you. And he's like, yeah, because there's a lot of rules and stipulations if you want to like live in these shelters and if you want to, do so on and so forth. So I have to respect that again. Respect that self-determination, respect that decision. If somebody wants, he knows that there's resources there. He just rather like live freely, quote unquote, instead of like being in these systems that like have like, let's say, a curfew, or have you can't have a dog, or you can't have a this or whatever. So I do have to understand that and acknowledge that. But again, like I do think that there's a smaller amount of people that fit in that bucket versus the larger amount that don't want to be homeless, and they just should be given housing.
So I just wanted to chime in. As far as overpopulation, we do have overcrowding in certain communities, but we know which communities those are. And that is more of an issue of economics than it is about availability of spaces for people to live. In 2018, there was a report from 6 Square Feet that said nearly 250,000 New York City rental apartments sit vacant. In 2019, there was an article that came out that said 4,100 luxury apartments are empty in New York City. Part of the issue is some of when Carl Clapper came to our meeting, he was talking about the structure of the mortgage, the structure of how real estate is financed. The fact that there are people who are speculating, the fact that there are peer-to-pays, people who have 3 apartments, you know, because they may live in the city Monday through Friday, but they have, you know, another one in Queens and another one in Brooklyn, just, you know, how they're depending on how they're feeling that weekend. These are all things that weigh into the less apartments for other people, and also the affordability issue. It restricts the market of accessible apartments, and then therefore allows those landlords to charge a ridiculous price because they know the vacancy, according to the way we look at it, is low. So those are all things that we as a city need to change.
And just to echo, sorry, Ariel, go ahead. I feel like I keep interrupting.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I think just to try and bring like a kind of resolve, even on my own end, not as a board, but I think that, you know, kind of even just going back months, right? We were saying that we kind of want to have a bit more discussion with some policy experts. So, you know, this is something I have been thinking about. I think that it's just right now is like making it much more difficult. And I think, you know, even if you ask Domingo was trying to connect me with the executive director for NMCIR. And I just think it's just more difficult right now to try and communicate. But I do want to try and make sure that we're reaching out to some folk, because there has been people that have been planning. So Giselle Routhier, she is actually I think it's like the senior policy advisor for Picture the Homeless. I've met her before. She's been, I mean, just instrumental in the conversations about the homeless and advocating for them at the city council. She has actually been very supportive of some of the legislation that the city council was looking at, both prior and I think maybe some of the stuff that's coming up now, in regards to trying to make sure that we actually had vouchers that actually matched 100% of the rent. This was something that we were expecting to actually potentially get the political will and courage to have passed by the city council. But this was a bill that was looked at prior to COVID. And so I think that, you know, that's one of the other areas that I think we all kind of find we agree on, but also, you know, even just talking about Waldy's point about how there's just so much funding that's gone into what's really like a marketplace for homelessness. You know, a lot of folks don't realize just how much we spend on the DHS shelter system. It's over $2.1 billion, right? And, you know, if we're talking about 60,000 people that are homeless, you're maybe looking at about 20 to 30,000 apartments that we could individually give vouchers for and get these people off the streets. Given, I'm not saying that I know the exact numbers as to how much that would cost, but I feel as if that would provide some, not to mention, you know, relief in regards to getting people off the streets and into homes, but also not to mention getting resources that could be directly allocated towards supportive housing. Because like Waldis was mentioning, there are, yes, some individuals who kind of feel that they want that ability to live on their own, to have kind of that self-determination in what they want to do with their lives and how they want to live, but also get some of that support whenever they do need it. And I think that's kind of been the discussions, even when you talk about senior housing, right? Because some seniors, they don't, you know, some seniors, they won't like that. They won't like the idea of having someone constantly coming around and asking them what they want, or should I get this for you, right? Some individuals want their own ability to do things on their own. And so I think that, you know, when you have this budget that is, yes, like very helpful for those that need the shelters, there's also the opportunity to use that budget towards other programs that could specifically get those individuals into their own homes, potentially offer that very level of stability that might be needed, even if just for a year, right? Because that was one of the focuses that the city had when we were talking about programs that brought communities out to other cities. And that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about prior COVID, but a lot of things have changed. But yeah, that there's a number of different ways in which a lot of different cities, states, countries even try to address homelessness. In Amsterdam, I'll also just point out. I mean, it's nearly virtually just it doesn't exist in Amsterdam. So at some point, I will try and reach out to Giselle from Pictures of the Homeless. I think that she might very well add some context to a lot of the questions that we've had for the past few years in this committee. Just how do we really address some of the much more larger policy issues that we have?
So I have a clarifying question and then a comment. One is I agree with Waldy's. I would like to know the impact of eliminating the Section 8 program, even though it's not, I know it's not completely eliminated, but it's eliminated for most people. So I'd be interested to know like the population that it still serves, like how has that benefited them, and then the people that have been left out of that, what's the impact been? But there is the city FEPS program, which does pay up to 100% of the rent, depending on whether that person is eligible for that and whether the amount of their apartment per month does not exceed a certain amount. So there may be some conversation that we can have about raising that limit so that it pulls more people into that net. Because I think that if it exceeds a certain cap, then you're just not even eligible at all, which is a problem because maybe some people could qualify and then they'd be responsible for a bigger portion than someone else would be, just even though their rent is higher. So I think those are some of the discussions that we should be having, like how the program itself is actually functioning. And then that being said, I would be remiss not to include, I have video of one of the state, I think assembly people, I don't remember his name at the moment, but actually Carmen was there when we went up to fight for the homes guarantee. And he spoke about the fact that our governor's family apparently helped to start one of these shelter programs, which makes a tremendous amount of money per bed, per facility, to basically provide these shelters that are temporary at an extreme expense. So I think that that's something that definitely, like this is working, unfortunately, similar to the way that the incarceration system works, in that it's incentivizing keeping the shelter system running. It's incentivized. We should be wanting to get rid of shelters, right? There shouldn't be an incentive on running shelters. The city should be taking control over that and running it at cost if possible, or if anything, just with the overhead that it takes to run that shelter, and not that somebody's, buying a yacht with it.
Do you know why Section 8 was eliminated?
Why?
I
thought you were gonna answer.
Why? No, this was a question. This was a question.
I'm trying to find, not necessarily why. I was trying to find how much funding they were using before. I just don't remember the years. I'm just throwing out random years in Google search. How much the budget was before in comparison to what the DHS budget is right now, and possibly try to find how much they budget for with as Aisha mentioned, with FEPS and link vouchers and so on and so forth, just to see more or less if there's some type of comparison point in terms of budget related, if it's the same, similar to the same, why not go back to that, I guess? How much was the DHS budget back then, as opposed to now? But yeah, I was just trying to briefly look at that. But if I don't find it now, I'm gonna just try to do my own homework and figure it out. But I don't know why Section 8 got eliminated. I want to. I don't want to say who. I don't remember even who was the one that eliminated it, but I think it's because it was too expensive. I'm assuming so. In terms of like, it was probably too. You know, like the city slash state always wants to cut budgets and stuff, but I don't know who made that call.
Well, Section 8 isn't eliminated. I'm sorry. I should jump in here. Section 8 is not eliminated.
Not
It's
completely.
not eliminated, but
It's just
like you can't. There's limitations to like how to access it. As before, there was like, you know, you apply for it, then you may, I think there's like a waiting list, and then you get it eventually. But then now it's like you either have to like have either had it. If I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Or you know, you have to like move into a building that has it, and then like if you live there for like a certain amount of time, then maybe you can leave with it or something like that. Or
Yeah.
the building in Section 8 itself. There's like
Yeah.
different like versions of it now, and like FEPS and link vouchers are a version of that. HASA is a version of that. But they are specific to like different populations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, it trickles down from the federal budget. So there's a connection to the federal budget for this. It's not just a New York issue or a city issue. It's also federal.
Gotcha.
Most of the funding from Section 8 comes from the federal government down to the state.
Okay.
So with that,
We need Ben Carson.
Can I?
with that, I just want to try and get us to essentially start transitioning. The only reason why is because it's now 9, and we want to try and get something, you know, just get something on paper for resolution regarding the rent guidelines board. I know we haven't, you know, again, we haven't had much time to discuss it. It's, you know, like I said, you know, this year we really kind of got hurt by things going on with the pandemic. There has been a few reports. I'm not sure if anyone got to see the video that I shared from the I think it was the April 30th meeting. It was essentially just a meeting that was held reviewing some of the reports that came out by the Rent Guidelines Board staff. They specifically had put out one that was focused on income and also affordability of rent-regulated units. And then there was another report, I think, that came out a few days later that had been focused on income and then also the cost of essentially running these individual buildings. If you haven't perhaps seen or heard much of it, you know, of course, we know that there's so much going on in the news. I just want to like point out the individual link that I had sent out earlier this month. It specifically will take you directly to the website. It's just highlighted as Rent Guidelines Board. When you click on that link, you'll see that they're just discussing, you know, pretty much what the role of the RGB is. And then you can check out at the very top on the third item, it's meetings. If you go to the 2020 meetings and hearings, you'll just see the layout of what's happened thus far. What I want to specifically just point out is that here you can essentially get the reports. So I'm actually just pulling it up myself right now.
So, are you able to share, screen share in WebEx? Yeah. Can we-
I'm not as technology, you know, driven, so let me try and figure it out. How do I?
It's a little. It looks like a cup with an arrow in it at the bottom. Should be in the bottom middle. I've been on WebEx all week, so.
Up at the bottom. I don't.
It's it should be next to your. You should have. I mean, it may be different on your side, but you should have the mic, the video option, and then next to it.
Yeah, it's like that little semi-square thingy with the arrow.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Yes.
Yay.
Great. So this is essentially the Rent Guidelines Board website. This is where they're setting up essentially all the, kind of the dates, the meetings. They'll have the meeting video included here. It's about 2 days ago, they had a report specifically here. So I just want to try and find it. Those were, kind of the real sticking there. Of course, maybe.
So while you look for that, I just want to go on record saying previously we had discussed asking for rollbacks of rent. And I know it's a long shot. I know part of the discussion is the expenses that landlords are incurring during this time because, whatever the ways that the pandemic may be impacting them. But we cannot afford to exacerbate the dynamics of this crisis by having people evicted, by having people who are not working, unable to afford rent. It's kind of like a replica of the meeting that we had last month when we passed that resolution, just talking about how people are impacted during this crisis. And that there are calls from, across this city stating that there's an extreme burden right now. And that's not changing. I think it was said earlier in the meeting that now it's been extended to August even. So the Rent Guidelines Board, the fact that they even thought to propose 2.5 for 1 year, like we haven't had that in how long? 2.5 for 1 year during a pandemic, and it just speaks to how tone deaf the Rent Guidelines Board can be. So certainly it would make sense to have a rent freeze. But I would hope that we could be ambitious as a board and speak to what the real reality of it is, which is that, like, even right now, I was doing my budget. My budget is like a week short of what it normally would be just for food because there's price gouging going on in our neighborhood. So what I normally would spend month in and month out on food has now gone up at least 25%. Right? And so these are the things that people are dealing with, and the Rent Guidelines Board should not be adding more pressure to that. So
Yeah, and actually, just so that I guess folks can see very quickly some of the presentations. And sorry, yeah, just to note, this is the screen page. It's under research, the very last item on the right-hand side. This is essentially what we were being shown on the meeting on March 30th. Sorry, I just want to briefly show the screen, the slides essentially, because it has, I think, just really the nuts and bolts of why we might advocate one way or another. And my computer that sometimes is slow. So yeah, this is just notification. There we go. Yeah, so this is just letting you know that this is the typical study that happens every year right before being able to essentially project the costs of living. And so it goes based on what's happening at that moment as most up to date with the information that they can collect. During the call, they were trying to make note that things were changing very rapidly with regard to costs of really just maintaining some of these buildings was really available too, not to mention because when they would reach out to lenders, some of them could report and some of them weren't necessarily able to report as up to date, the data. So I'm sorry, because my computer is going slow. So this is just outlining that, these are the factors that they look into. inflation, growth, household income, housing costs, evictions proceedings, homelessness, usage of emergency assistance, and other indicators. Uh, what you saw, or what you'll see actually, so the growth at the with the data they had available, right? This here. Now, what you'll see, right, is going to change because the unemployment rate is not looking that way, right? So I just want to preface that just to be clear. Um, they did make note in the individual call that they were excited over the past year to see some information about the decrease in evictions. I think that was, kind of the very big point that everyone was talking about now, because we passed a lot of changes in the law, right, that were very helpful for protecting a lot of families. I think, for our district, right, I'll just say, even on my end, having done really the work to try and protect a lot of the tenants in our community in Inwood and Washington Heights, it wasn't looking as fruitful sometimes, and these are one of the things that just drove me to want to get involved actually here with you all on the community board. And even Aisha and I, we were thankful to get a bus ride up with Carmen and a few other members, and also try and push this legislation. It was very helpful. Thankfully, it really increases the protections that we will definitely need throughout this crisis. And it just goes to show you by really just the data there. My computer goes so slow now with this.
Yeah, I'm honestly a little concerned about political will during coronavirus times, because sometimes it does take physical bodies being present, putting pressure on, some of our elected officials, not specifically from our district, but from across the city and state, in order to make sure that the right protections are in place. And that's something that we can't do now. So I think this is a time that even more so, our board really needs to step up and stand in the gap for our communities, and give voice to what needs to be happening.
Definitely. And I also just want to point this out, because this is actually from the Federal Reserve Bank, right? So, hope in my own mind, hopefully it's the most. Oh, sorry. Hopefully it's the most up to date. I think this is probably the most important here to look and see that it's really stating the job market weakened substantially, and wages were flat. As we know from even just the 2008 financial recession crisis, uh, wages got lowered. And so when we're in the midst of this kind of pandemic, this economic recession, whatever you'll have it, you have to also account for the fact that many individuals will not necessarily see wages like they even did now. So specifically when we're talking about our community, right, that's has a lot of members struggling, and as Carmen was also mentioning, that are constantly in the midst of a crisis. This makes it much worse. Long term, their rent is presumably still going to be looking at, or even the landlords that own these properties, they're going to look at ways to try and increase the rent, because you're also going to have to account for inflation. You're also going to have to account for the countless number of issues that are going to come up when trying to really contract and get various services done to your building. So these are just, I think, just some of the things that pop up to me right away. It should also be of concern when we're talking about, what do we want to put on the resolution.
I think something that should definitely be included is that this is something that is emerging, and having a vote, first of all, right now, is having a vote without true knowledge of where we stand, because we're still waiting to see what the outcomes are going to be. We're still waiting to see how people are impacted. We're still waiting to see when this crisis is going to be done. So how, if they were to make a determination to raise rents, what would that be based on when we don't even know? right? And so they could actually be responsible for creating extreme hardship at a time when they could have had the choice to do otherwise. So I think that should be a primary tenant in this resolution. And then secondary to that is that there have been some steps implemented to give relief to landlords already. Like they were one of the first to get some type of relief in that it was extended as far as mortgages and things of that nature. However, the joblessness, where homelessness already is, yes, evictions have been halted. That does not, until we have a decision. Oh, actually, did Bruce say that there was a decision that was made about something dealing with, I think that's what he said was extended to August, right? The moratorium on evictions, right?
Yeah, August
But what,
20th. It's supposed to be about 60 days.
so what still hasn't been decided though is what happens after that. Do you owe 6 months of rent at that point? And if that is in fact the case, I don't know that anyone's job is going to give them an increase, or people who are not working now are going to get a job that pays them that much more to be able to pay 6 months back. And so that should be factored in as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'll also just point out here, I think the initial unemployment claims, I mean, that's one of the strongest markers, right? And this is only going up to April 18th. Yeah, this you know this just goes to show you that you're talking about 1.4 million that are going to be hopefully receiving unemployment claims. Uh, some are still not necessarily getting them. Hopefully, there's some retroactive payments that will be made soon if they have not already. Um, I mean, I'll also just mention I do know that some individuals that have applied, they've actually spent over 6 weeks waiting for their first unemployment check. Um, so, between March to April 18th, that could have been the entire period they might have already been waiting just to get it. Potentially even longer because at the very initial phase of this, we had such a ginormous crash really in the market. I mean, the system that's being used for the unemployment benefits, as Carmen was also mentioning. And I think this was actually one of the areas that I wanted to discuss tonight when having brought up actually really just a lot of the immigrant relief fund and who we might be looking at to try and get this out to. I think that when you look at the individual industries that get most affected, right, you're also talking about a lot of the immigrants that work in these areas, accommodation and food services. Through my research, I was also seeing that this is particularly one of the areas in which you'll find a lot of our fellow immigrant neighbors are in, right? So their wages are cut off at this point. They're cut off. Many may not even necessarily make that much, right? Because as we know from previous years when we were talking about the rezoning, we saw the studies from the Dominican Studies Institute, right? The average income that they had found was around 29,000 for a lot of Dominican families. So we're seeing some numbers that might be reflective statewide, but it could very much so differ even from those that are in our community. And I'm sorry, did I cut off somebody? Yeah, I didn't mean to.
I just wanted to say, in the discussion that we had last time, I didn't know this, but aside from, so basically non-conventional organizations. So a friend of mine, she has, I think it's called Bronx Bound Books, where she promotes literacy from a mobile unit throughout the Bronx community because there were no bookstores. And when she went to apply for relief funds that were available to nonprofits, it being that she doesn't have a brick and mortar, she's not eligible. So that just to me adds there's so many brackets of where relief should exist, but they don't, and that's also affecting workers in those fields as well. as far as whether those things are going to persist, as far as whether they're going to have payroll allowances available during this crisis. All of those things are, those areas are being impacted.
And I do think it's like also going along, just I think what we've all been saying is just like the data, how resourceful, how updated, how available it will be is also another factor, right? Because one thing that we're seeing, like I keep just mentioning, is just like what's currently available, and also just to note, like I said, this is something that's looking kind of either New York State wide or New York City wide. It's not as specific to our community, right? And so that specific information is also going to take more time to get out to us. I thought 16 gigabyte RAM is good enough, but apparently not. So yeah, and this is just also making note that the 504 per week or 2100 a month is also something that's changing, right? Because we have a sort of new supercharged unemployment system. Um, you know, hopefully it should continue. I think, quite frankly, longer. But um, you know, right now, this so what you're seeing on the screen is actually based on what it was, and that's why I just want to also highlight this is, well, UTI, I mean, normal New York State unemployment. That's what it looked like beforehand. If you were perhaps those that are like 52,000, right? Um, looking at about 2,100 per month, you're maybe not making much, right? You're not necessarily, presumably, paying the rent, uh, paying any costs that come with raising children in a family, uh, food, bills. So that was difficult as is. Now we're looking at an extra 600 per week. Of course, much more beneficial. I think that, however, you're also talking about a federal baseline that can be much more beneficial for those that, right, are in less expensive states. Uh, how far the 2,400 goes, and just to also point out, for those who haven't necessarily had experience with it, that 2,400 is also being taxed, right? Your unemployment insurance, that's also being taxed. So it gets down to a lower level by the time it reaches you. So it's just incredibly important for folks to know that it's not like, oh, this person's getting, $4,000 clean. Like, no, it's going to get cut down, and so that might very well look like 2,700 or let's even say 3,000 by the time it gets to that family. And so that can go, the rent and everything else. Hopefully they live in rent stabilized apartments. But for some that have been moving into their homes that are working in these very vulnerable industries, they're able to try and sustain themselves based on what they'll have and based on what their needs are. So I thought this actually was interesting. This is kind of just giving you a layout for what it might look like for a lot of families right now. Because of the kind of supercharged benefits, right? From March, people weren't necessarily going to be able to get those resources. Hopefully now the idea is that between what's April to July, they should be able to have some income. However, based on what's going to happen on the federal level, it's also trying to outline here that if there's an extension, that's great, but without it, it kind of plummets. And so this is kind of just giving you the idea here. Right now, this is kind of what's set in stone. It's supposed to go down. If there's a continuation, it may very well hold up much better for a lot of the families and households that are here in our communities. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions on this?
So I feel like what's missing from this data is Okay, yeah, because I've had conversations with friends of mine who are landlords that are like, oh, but people are getting $1,000 a week now. Why should they get an exemption from their rent? And it's kind of like it's generalizing without true knowledge of what the layout is, right? So the data says, oh, now they're getting $1,000 a week. Yeah, but what if I filed for my unemployment 3 months ago or a month ago and I still haven't gotten it? Then I'm getting zero, right? So, and then I also still don't know if at the end tail of that, if I actually am going to get my benefit, right? I might not get it. So, I think also, and then where I heard you touch on, benefits otherwise. I know that for some people, their their welfare benefits, public assistance, SNAP, has been maximized. Were they not eligible for it prior, for whatever reason, they've maxed that out. But if you already were at the max, then you don't get an increase. So I kind of question that because so if I wasn't eligible, then I wasn't eligible, right? And that's a benefit to me if I get an extra $50. That's an extra $50 that I'm gonna be able to maintain my family. So what's to say that the person who was already getting max shouldn't get an extra $50? They were eligible for the max, right? The other person was not eligible for the max. Why should one person get the increase and not the other? So these are like if we just listen to the data, like, oh well, people are getting the max and people are getting this additional, it doesn't tell the full story of what's really happening, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and I'll also just point out, I mean, I think that the other concern is that people are actually thinking once this pandemic is over, or once the shutdown is over, things are going to go back to normal. People are going to get their jobs. People are going to have that kind of income, and this is again very important to point out, where economists are flat out mentioning that when you look at the trends in an economic downturn, people don't get back to that income. Specifically for a lot of those low income wage earners, for specifically a lot of the people that aren't necessarily uh, going to be the individuals that come out with bachelor's degrees, with master's degrees, directly to these job sites and trying to get a good wage. So I think it's also very important that people realize that our economy is not going to be the same after this. Our economy is going to have to adjust. Even for people that work in the service industry, I'm sure that they will not return with full hours. So these are kind of the questions that I think need to be kind of thought about a bit more, uh, because at the end of the day, rent is still there, but we have no guarantee that these various resources are going to be. So with that said, I'm going to continue. I think this is kind of already like the last few slides. I just want to try and make sure that I was, trying to provide some information based on what they had there. And yeah, this is just kind of interesting really quickly what GDP looks like already. It's gone down. There's kind of already been a discussion about what is the idea of what will be projected unemployment by the end of this year. The very conservative, I think the very positive number is looking that we're going to be at 20 and then we're going to jump on down to 15, and so but some people have actually projected it could be as high as 30 at the peak. So I'm not necessarily certain that we've already reached that unemployment peak. Um, it could very well change, but this is just what we have here.
I mean, my biggest, I think, fear, not necessarily fear, but like, just concern is just inflation and like how that's going to be in the future. So I think right now, we're trying to like, rushing towards trying to find the temporary solutions, and with reason, I have to give credit to the stimulus checks and so on and so forth, to what it's done, and unemployment and the enhancement and the unemployment and the enhancement towards benefits, like the positive side, trying to find the positives within it all. But my fear too is just inflation and how and these deficits, like the state is in a deficit, and like how much, more taxes are they going to be, excuse me, is going to be taken out from the middleman, right? From the middle class, excuse me, I need water. But like my fear is the inflation rate, and like I think that due to landlords being the way they are, and like I think that the slumlords being how they are, the rent is only going to increase, and the percentages are only going to increase. And inflation is going to increase dramatically. I think like in 2 years from now, inflation is going to be dramatic. And I read a stat actually the other day that the our deficit as a country has increased by $1 trillion in the shortest amount of time, and it's from 1 month, and the amount of time has been is 1 month. Typically, it like takes like a couple years on average, and within the last month, we've increased our deficit by $1 trillion in a month, and that's kind of like mind-boggling. And when you think about like how and why, and it's like it is because the Fed is printing money at will, right? To stimulate the economy, and really the stimulation of the economy is the stock market. And so like when you mentioned earlier about the I think you said Forbes article that you read about like how the rich have become richer, like $380 billion richer, is really because their stock value it went down crazy in March, and then in April we had the best like month since like 1987. And so these people that really their assets are found within in their stock value. They're tied, like the Bezos of the world. They're tied into their companies, but their stock took a hit. Then in the best month since 1987, of course they got $380 billion richer, and really it's because again the Fed is printing money to help those folks out, because the idea of trickle down economics is that if they're sustained, if they're somewhat okay, and then it'll trickle down to us, and it'll trickle down to the lower the low wage, everybody else, and so the idea to me again, like the fear, like I look at the stock market and I see we are exactly where we were a year ago. And a year ago, there was no COVID, right? and so, like, I don't understand how that makes any sense, like, from a logical perspective or an economics perspective. I get what's being done. I do get Trump trying to pull every card in his possible to try to, like, save his presidency. I do see that, right? But I'm just concerned about, like, what our future is going to look like. Not now, right now, but just really like 2-3 years from now. And so, yeah, I just have to speak my piece about that, just because, yeah.
Thank you so much. And I want to say, I lean more in the direction of, like we say, oh, well, to save his presidency or to try to help the economy. But I see the timeline a little bit more wide when you look at the fact that Republicans and Democrats alike were in a meeting discussing this crisis while the president was calling it a hoax, right? Dropped millions of dollars of stock before the rest of the public actually knew that this was a problem, and then announced it. Then the stock took a dive, right? So basically, they're afforded to make the money on the front side, the stock take a dive when they announce it, and then they could buy up for the low, right? That's the game, buy low. So, and then how did it go back up? Because the Fed did an infusion of $3 trillion, which is going to do nothing else but increase speculation, just like the housing market. So it's all a game.
Yeah, it is. And literally, like, it was $15 billion a day injected into the market. Then it became to 10. Now I think we're at 8. So again, they're trying to wean off of it. But I'm just trying to say, I think OC has something to say. Yeah.
I think we're kind of getting off topic, and it's like, I want to scream and yell,
Sorry.
but I have.
Dynamics are similar, but yeah.
We'll discuss it more on our next call. We'll get
Exactly.
some things and just talk about it via Zoom.
The thing is just, I have to leave the meeting in like 15 minutes and it's already 9:35.
I think the
Okay.
base of Waldy's point was that long-term, the dynamics of what the choices that are being made now are gonna be on our backs. And it's not gonna
For
be on the
years.
backs of the rich. It's gonna be on the backs of the poor and the middle class. And so in the vein of this resolution, what does that mean? Right? If we are trying to have foresight, and I bring it back to the first thing that I said. The first thing that I said is we don't even know how bad this could get for us, and neither does the RGB. So I think that that should be a primary focus of this. The fact that we need more data. We need to not be making choices like 2.5 for 1 year during a pandemic. It's just insane. It's insane. And I would like to see language that is persuasive and speaks to the heart of the matter and speaks truth to power. So that they don't make a decision like that because it's crazy. I want to ask the committee, what are your thoughts about the fact that the mayor actually was calling for a run freeze in many of his press conferences? And we have thought for many years that behind the scenes, the RGB is just doing what the mayor wants them to do, right? So what are your thoughts as far as that the mayor in multiple press conferences has been talking about the need for relief for renters, and then the RGB comes out and proposes 2.5?
So I think and sorry, I just want to try and get Waldis. You're up. You're officially the person, remember, creating the official language. I apologize. I know you're moving from your comfy spot there.
Nah, no worries, no worries. I'm here for the team.
So I think if you got the 2019 RGB resolution that I think I shared previously, I think we can try and kind of use some of that language there.
All right, let's see. Did you send this?
It was on. Let's see.
When did you send it?
It was on the last. Let's see. The last. Oh no, the first. Yeah, it was the first email.
Hold on, yeah, I got it.
May 4th, 2020. And I apologize for my craziness sending it 2 a.m., but it's been a pretty busy few weeks with the mayor's office.
No stress, man.
Stressed, very stressed.
Really? Why so?
Just a pandemic.
Do you want to pull it up so that people can see it? So like the OC and I know OC. Well, we emailed this, so I think everybody may have access to it. But I'm just saying.
Oh no, yeah. I was gonna say, if would you be able to pull up the resolution and then just like do share screen, because if anything, that way you can just have it so that everyone can see, and then we can just go directly into like line by line. If we want to try and take out one thing to replace it with like something more updated, things like that.
Hold on. Just make sure. All right. Does everybody see my screen? Cool. All right.
I never took you for just a gray screen kind of guy.
What?
I never took you for just a gray screen kind of guy. I would have figured you'd have some colorful light background.
I have my guys Kanye and Jay-Z in the background. Yeah. All right. Let's see. This is what you wait. Does everybody see it?
Yep.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I can't see everybody, so I don't know. Okay, cool. This is what Ariel said. This created. When was this created?
That was June.
Oh.
of-
So what is October 2019?
That
On the
was
bottom,
Yeah,
the
that's-
last resolve.
Don't know.
because that's when the new guidelines take effect.
Got it. Yeah. So that's why I was a little thrown off. Okay.
Change this to 2020.
So wait, are we just like kind of basically?
I would
Copying.
save I would save the old one as a new document.
Mhm.
Just change the dates. There may be language that you want to leave in. And then figure out which whereases are you going to drop. Figure out there are things that we state every year. And we just update what the new stats are.
All these.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm gonna just like do this version of split screening because on the Microsoft.
If you would have just did save as, it would have just created that same document would have become a new document.
Yeah, if it makes it easier, that way you can just use that one document and then you'll just
Yeah.
go editing it.
Also, just work on this document as like the old document.
Here's what you do, because you wanna have the old copy on your computer, right? So do file save as,
Yeah.
and then just save it as the new one that you wanted. So change it to May 2020.
Gotcha. I see what you mean. All right.
Version 1.
Let me save this one. But yeah, let me just do. Let's press it.
So, I guess then for the first whereas, I think at that time there had been a preliminary vote, and so I think that was when we were discussing the just range of them for each.
Well, didn't they already propose the 2.5, 3.5? I know they're walking it back, kind of, but
Let me see, because I thought I thought they did, but I'm not too sure.
Just for my own clarity, is this board, the RGB, do they only work on like rent stabilized apartments?
Anything that's rent regulated, so technically rent stabilized and rent controlled.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Okay. October 1st, 2020.
Oh yeah, I forgot the preliminary vote was actually today. It was literally when we started our meeting actually. So
Which is May 7th, 2020.
yeah, so they had the meeting literally when we started our meeting right now.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if maybe there's already a rate out in the news, but I can check later or something.
rent freeze.
Oh, they voted on a rent freeze?
Yes.
They voted on a rent freeze?
Did they do it for the 2 year as well? Do you see?
2-year leases signed over the year beginning October 1 would see a 0%. What? They did it for the 2-year?
Wow.
No, wait. In the first year and a 1% in the second year. Not bad.
Not bad.
I mean, yeah, not bad.
And in that context, there was the article I have up on my other computer that talks about how people don't realize sometimes when it is that low that you could actually benefit more by doing the 2-year. I personally have always done 0% because 0% is 0%. But in the long term, you benefit more. So I think it has like an algorithm. I haven't been able to complete the art reading it because I was so busy this week. But yeah. So depending on what happens here, I think that we should raise awareness because something that I saw that was a lapse was that when we had previous rent freezes, too many people in our community had no idea and had been so used to doing a 2-year that they automatically did the 2-year and didn't take advantage of the freeze, which,
I'm
basically.
gonna have to leave you for a few minutes. I'll come back in 10 minutes.
Yeah, we understand. Thank you.
Okay.
So
Okay, so
given this, I think that what we can do actually is change around the language. So yeah, May 7th, 2020. Good. By the way, maybe just for the 2 bullet points, actually put in the specific ones that they've already given as a preliminary, as for the whereas.
I'm sorry, repeat that. My bad. I'm just like reading this. What you said?
So I was saying, because we actually have, the luxury of knowing what the preliminary vote was, we can note that in the whereas, they voted for a 1-year renewal lease, commencing on October 1st, 2020. This would be,
2019.
wait, this would
0%?
be on or after. I don't know why we put on or before September 30th. Is that? I think we're only supposed to keep the first date, right? Because it's only on or after October 1st, the 1 year. Yeah. So we can remove on or before September 30th, 2019.
No, that's the term of the lease. Leases that commence on or after and on or, it's supposed to be and
Oh, 2021. Yeah, I see. Yeah, it was definitely September 30th, 2021. Sorry about that.
yeah.
September 30th, we said 2021?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's any lease that commences after the start date of the effective or before the end date of that year that the RGB is designating is what the language is.
Yeah. And then we would
I
just
see
do
what you
like,
mean. This is
For a second, I
2021
was
then
like,
as well.
God, did we have it wrong all along?
20, would this be 2022, being that it's 2 years?
Yep.
Yeah.
So what my confusion is, I guess, look, I'm just undoing what I have here.
Actually, no.
So it says for a 2-year lease commencing on or after October 1st, 2019, and or before September 30th, 2017.
No, it needs to be in the second, for the 2-year, it needs to be October 2020 and the same 2021. Because remember, if the RGB votes differently next year, then that won't be in effect for a person renewing their lease as a 2-year before 2021. You see what I mean?
Oh, so it's supposed to be kept
Yeah.
October 1st, September 30th, and also the October 1st and then September 30th, but the same year as 2021.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That captures the folks that are in that like gap, I guess.
It's based on that renewal bracket. Anybody
Yeah.
anybody renewing or getting a new lease in that bracket?
So it's 1% is the stat, correct?
The preliminary vote.
I'm not looking at an article, so I'm just curious. It's 1% for the 2-year lease, correct? Well, we want to put 0%. Are we urging for rent freeze, fucking YOLO? Excuse my language. Sorry.
Oh, this is only the whereas. So this would only just be us stating that what was the result of the preliminary vote
Oh,
tonight.
yeah, you're right. The facts. Yeah, the facts.
Yeah.
Right. Study after study.
So whereas study after study, year from show. Cities and price. Studies and reports of the government. Actually, that second one, I think, still holds.
For sure.
Where is more than 1 million houses? In Mercedes. Third whereas still holds.
Do we want to add,
Employment stuff.
do we want to add the RGB's own report?
Yeah. I was actually gonna say, I mean, with all that information on the unemployment, we can probably take that and put it as one of the whereas here.
Yeah, for sure.
I can just switch up and try to read off some stuff and just
Yeah, I was
for
gonna say, where it's like,
I think the second one stays the same. The third one needs to be updated.
this right here,
The third, is that, no, that would be the fourth whereas, right? Fourth whereas.
this one, the
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah, the stats need updating.
Gotcha. Let's see, where's the stats here?
What we pulled from at that point only had information. Well, I think this was census related information, and then may have been the health profile or something like that.
But I think for that third whereas it should still hold because it's referring to 2005 to 2015.
Yeah, but we're in 20 now, so there may be data more current than that. I think we keep the whereas, but if we can find new data for that, which we should be able to by now, we should.
Where do you think we can find that? You said in the census?
Either like the
Like
American,
the comptroller.
yeah, the American Community Survey, the ACS, the
I think
Department
the last
profile.
I think the last time we were taking that data, I think it might have came from the Furman Center because we had those sheets that were kind of outlining, I think, like a 10-year study. But
Was so just out of curiosity, because for this Google search I'm about to do real quick. Was this specific to CD12, or was that stat like New York City / state, and then it becomes, and then it was dwindled down to the stat of between 2006 to 2016. CD12 in 2013, 49%, 49.5 of residents.
Looking at what's district specific, because like that stat about households earning less than 35,000, that definitely was CD12 data at the time.
Yeah, so that was CD12's data, but what is the sentence before or
the 18%?
Statement before? Yeah, that's state data or city data? Or that's CD12 data?
I believe that is probably district specific since it's all in that same whereas. But we could just make sure that we do keep it in that context for this reso.
Let me just.
Yeah, and if it's not, like if it's New York State base or city base, then we need to specify.
Oh,
right.
Sorry, I just got a message from the staff. I think the WebEx is like supposed to shut off at 10.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Shoot.
Sheesh.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
I'm not sure why is that done. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know how to change it. I mean, let's try and see.
I don't know if they could change it now that it's been created, but I noticed that that's been also what's been happening with the general meeting And I get like we all want to go home, we want to specify time, but when business is in action and we're not done and it's 10, that shouldn't mean that we end it because the WebEx is going to end. Like that's doesn't make any sense.
No, for you. So I mean, I'm just for I guess to save as much time as possible because I could just do this research on my own, or like if you guys want to like chime in as well.
So I think the stats you could do behind the scene, but we should have discussion about what has been, like some of the stuff that we discussed in this whole conversation to make sure that it's reflected.
Like, what do we want to add in? I guess.
I think taking some of the whereases that we actually presented in the last resolution, and Aisha was actually the one that suggested it. There's some stuff that I think would be very beneficial for like mentioning the unemployment, specifically who is going to
ask. Yeah.
Because I think that's definitely like some of like the the easiest ways to kind of like tie in everything going on with just the pandemic in general across the community.
And I also suggested to Ariel that what we should do is reference our previous resolution that was passed by the board, which was related to the fact that people are rent strike, but we don't have to like put all that language in here, but we could reference it and then include the parts that are pertinent to this rent RGB vote.
Okay.
Do you being that this is going to cut off in 4 minutes, it would have been nice to know earlier from the office, but I suggest I'm not going to move because I'm not going to put it on the table for it to be voted on, but I suggest that what we do is complete some of this behind the scenes and maybe have exec ratify it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, we can try and connect. I mean, I know this kind of is taking a bit more time, but yeah, we can try and connect if you all want. Maybe the weekend might be best.
We can't have we're I don't think we should be having
like meetings.
Right. But if everybody could maybe like circulate language that they think should be in it, that can go before the exec, I think that would be
right. Yeah, I would actually gonna suggest maybe we can put this on a Google Doc. That way we can kind of get language just amongst us. We can try and get just get a main template. Might just need to be that if you all want to discuss it more, maybe then before we have the executive committee try to put forward then that resolution. Maybe that might just need to be it.
Is this recorded?
I'm sorry?
Is this WebEx recorded that we can refer to later?
Yeah, I think Ebenezer said earlier that it's being recorded. Yeah.
Because if that is, then maybe we could just reflect back on some of the things that we pointed out in the conversation to pull language from.
Yeah. So for real quick, 2 minutes, like the 2 minutes we have here, I'm just putting like for sake of my own organization. So we're gonna whereas some unemployment stats. What else are we gonna whereas? Whereasing.
We're taking some of the whereas specific to the pandemic that was on the last resolution.
You can swing that resume.
Yeah.
I think you did you?
Yeah.
No.
We shared the last one.
Right, you did. Yeah. I remember you. I didn't. I don't think I opened the attachment. I do remember reading.
I'll send it around again on the same chain for this meeting.
Has that been finalized? Has it been like ratified, signed by Eleazar?
Yeah, Steve Simon got his money's worth.
Well, at least why are you trying to get me in trouble? Wow, man. This is
Um,
what comes up now when you get isolated. All
hey
right.
man, you can fix the homeless issue, Ariel, as soon as you run for office, man. I'm just saying.
Why you gotta do that? All right. The meeting I think is about to cut off. So I just want to say, thank you all again. And hopefully we can just try and connect through those Google Doc and hopefully just get this out. But again,
So I will be. I'm gonna try to work on some of it tomorrow during work. And then I'll email. I'll hit you up, Ariel, to I guess like formulate the Google Doc, and then we'll take it from there. I'll try to have it done by tomorrow. No promises. The latest I can have it done is by Sunday though, for sure.
oh no, yeah, no worries. I think we'll be good on time. Yeah, it's just I was not expecting everything here. Cut.
Yeah, I didn't expect that either, but it's all good.
Okay, yeah, I just I just don't know when it's gonna cut.
Business, no nude business.
Naisha wanted to bring something up, but I don't think we like.
Try and see, because it doesn't seem to be cutting off. We're already at 10:01.
Naisha, you still you want to bring up what you wanted to? Naisha?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I just wanted to bring up, I don't think the conversation should be had now, but I definitely want to have a conversation about just like language and sensitive service work and advocating for vulnerable populations. We should be using language that's sensitive to the population that we're advocating for or like making decisions for. But we don't have to do that now. Clearly, we're going to be cut off soon. So.
Yeah. Just curious, what do you mean? Like what?
Just conversations like instead of saying like homeless people, people living on the street, or like drug users or like drug addicts, people that use drugs, just like making sure that we're like humanizing individuals and like honoring their dignity when we're like having conversations about them. Because like on top of the fact that these individuals use drugs and they live on the street and they're undocumented, they are individuals and they are people only living with these things, and these things don't define them.
Agreed. I appreciate that too, because I honestly, is that the newer way of addressing these folks?
I guess it's just like the more PC term, just to like ensure that we're like set for humanity when we're like having conversations.
Domiciled or
people, even if like people living on the street, people that are homeless, so like they are people before they are whatever you're describing them as. Like that, they're now not the adjective. Just like I brought Ariel earlier, but I think that I can like set something, like create something to share with y'all. Just like generally, yeah. Just so that we're like.
Actually, that's actually helpful.
Okay, so I'll work on that for next month.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, y'all.
Did you?
We could coach Barbara through it, you know.
And I think that's
we'll have a Barbara specific training.
I think that should be something that maybe we should do. I don't know if it would be a rezo, but I think that the whole board should be.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
I think that is absolutely that's a noble cause, and it shouldn't just be for Housing and Human Services.
Right. I rock with it. Yep.
Well, you need to stop causing trouble.
I'm just going with the.
I don't have any problem with truth being spoken when it's true. So
Yeah. Are we wrapping up? What are we doing?
It seems like we're still on. I mean, so that sounds like that was new business. No old business.
Well, actually, the new not new business, but like I saw Curtis on, and I made the mention of not now, but like I made the mention earlier of like the crime rates being up. I know this is not like in our purview, but I just wanted to throw that out there just to be careful, guys, because like I have my brother and two of my friends one of my friends' car got stolen, and another one got broken into, and like syringes in his car. Like it seems like may have slept in his car. And my brother got his like tire stolen.
I've
This
actually
is all within like the last like 2 weeks. So
yeah, I have Citizen app. I don't know how many people have Citizen app, but it's been off the hook.
so
I've seen the Rite Aid up the street from me has had knife point, gun, being held up by gunpoint, all over the last month. So definitely crime is up. Um,
yeah, I might shoot Curtis the email just to like kind of like let him know. I guess like first-hand experience or like just second-hand experience, and to let him know. I guess like maybe to speak or to touch on it, maybe just so, like in his committee, I may just join for a few minutes just to see. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there just to be careful, guys, because you know, in these turbulent times, people tend to like act in disarray, and that's fine. But just got to be mindful. That's
I just want to put on the record something that I came across my timeline while we've been on this call is that elected officials are proposing that CBOs and faith organizations be a part of, actually be compensated to facilitate social distancing. And I would guess that that's a part of kind of like decriminalizing it. So maybe that's something that we should talk about. I don't know. But I think it's a good idea. I don't like
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
So yeah, I just don't like what's been happening with the criminalization of it. People are being basically beat because they're not social distancing. Meanwhile, in other communities, they're giving out free masks. Police officers giving out free masks.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. So I think the shift to CBOs as well as faith organizations being a part of having those discussions with people and raising awareness is a great idea. Because I've spoken to young people that don't understand what asymptomatic means. So they just think if I see you and you don't look sick, then we should be good. So there's definitely awareness that needs to be raised.
But I don't know that this is what you're saying, Aisha, is related to this resolution.
Sorry, so let's just try and maybe get the word.
New business now. We're in new business.
Yeah. So yeah, she just jumped out. I think so what happened is we might get cut off soon due to a limitation to the WebEx. What is this called? Whatever. The Cisco system. Yeah. So there might be an issue that we might get cut off. So like I'm gonna kind of like tie in this. I'm gonna fix this resolution up a little bit, and then like send it over to you guys, and then
we'll vote on it next month.
By the exec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because we're out of time, we cannot necessarily finish it right now.
Okay.
What I was saying is that I'll try and get the language, put it up on a Google Doc.
Okay.
We can try and put forward the official language to bring before the executive committee, and then we'll have it brought there.
Yeah. I would say though, just try to Ariel in the executive committee just give them full disclosure as to like the fact that we didn't necessarily vote on this resolution. I don't know if that is something, just to be as honest and ethical as possible. I don't know if that's the thing, but yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. I want to try and be able to get it, but time constraints.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess
So we're not voting it right now, right?
No, because we don't have the official language. But we'll bring it before exec, and then they'll be able to. But yeah, let's.
Is this a time-sensitive resolution that cannot wait for next month?
Well, next month we're not in session, right? I'm not making that up.
No, we'll be in session for next month. But remember what I was
Okay.
that essentially we don't know when the RGB final vote will be scheduled for, and so because of that, we don't necessarily know if we'll be able to get it before the entire committee right away. Now, if you're suggesting, however, that we can bring it back to our next committee meeting on like June, I think it's 4th or something like that, we can do that and then have it ratified by the executive committee then.
So one of the things that I had said to Ariel in our discussion was last year we voted in June, and in previous years we voted in June, but due to the climate around what was happening up in Albany around rent reform and like how people were being impacted just last year, what I realize is us doing it in June is too late, right? Because it does not give the opportunity for the community to kind of like basically circle around the work that we're doing. When we make a statement, it doesn't give a window for the community to say, you know what, CB12 has taken a stand and we want for that to be a part of the discussion, because what we're doing is we're basically voting right within a sliver of when RGB is going to vote. So they're not even reading our reso. They're not even, it's like happening like 2 days before or sometimes the same day. What's the point of that?
Okay.
I feel you.
So yeah, I mean, the circumstances just made it difficult here, of course, but I'm at least just thankful that we had some time to kind of talk a little bit about this and go through the presentation. I think it just made it clear a little bit more of the concerns that could be raised by RGB. And yeah, if like I said, if there's anything that comes up, if there's anything that you want to add on to this document, I think it just makes it also easy that we can also access it from a Google Doc. So I'll of course just connect with Waldis, and we'll try and put it up on there. And if there's anything, you always know you can call me. Sadly enough, we just can't have a meeting. But
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so I guess I'll adjourn the meeting there. Correction, I will adjourn the meeting there. It's 10:11. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a nice rest of your night.
Okay.
But I second it anyway, Ariel.
Okay.
I second as well. Third and fourth.
Later, guys.
Have
You
a
guys
good
stay safe, all right?
All right, take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.